Hey everybody, my name is Reverend David Harrison. I'm the senior pastor of First Christian Church here in Winston, Salem, North Carolina. And I'm also the executive director of New Communion Mobile Market and Pantry. I welcome you to Sent Seminar 2021. My much appreciation and thanks to the National Benevolence Association for this opportunity to present here on today as I talk about church and social impact. One of the guiding principles of this presentation and of this scope is particularly for our church and for our nonprofit is how the practice of communion, how it has transformed our church, how it has transformed how we interact with the community, and how do all these things come together. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about this concept, and I know we've all heard it before, church outside of the walls. Church outside of the walls. And this is where sometimes we have a hard time, we get into trouble with, but this concept of church outside of the walls. So what do I mean by church outside of the walls? Simply put, during my time in church before becoming a pastor, I felt really drawn to the community. There was this drawing that I really felt to the community. However, most of the time in church, I found the primary concentration at times seemed to only focus on two things: on Wednesday night for Bible study or Sunday morning. And for me, this really began to crystallize during my time as I led a college group at my previous church. And I quickly found that most of the issues, most of the problems, most of the trials that the college students were having that they faced had little to do with anything that was taking place on Wednesday night or Sunday morning. Most of these challenges had nothing to do with anything that was going on inside the walls of a church. What began to come into focus for me was I couldn't begin to speak to their spiritual needs of the students without being able to first address the tangible needs of the students. I couldn't deal with spiritual concepts or beginning to preach or teach without having a real way to deal with and address some of the tangible needs that they had as students and some of the challenges that they were facing outside of the church. So being able to observe this helped me to step back and really look at the totality of the work that we were doing within the church at that time. And what I quickly began to see was two things. There was two things that were happening in the church, and they weren't really connected together, even though we thought it was. There was this idea of outreach, but truthfully, what we thought was outreach was actually in-reach. So what we thought was outreach was actually in-reach. What we thought of was more about what the church was doing for itself. It was how we could get involved with as a church to do things together. I know we've all seen it. We've all had it before. We all have these community day events at the church. One example that comes to mind is everybody went back to school. Every church throws a program for get your backpacks, right? Everybody has the backpack programs, and they do these one-day events, and it's a one-off event, but it really lacks substance. What I found was there was a lack of connection between the community and the church because the community was never really invited to the table when all of these community events or one-day events were being planned. So the in-reach part that we thought was outreach was really just the church coming together and thinking and coming up with what we thought the community would like or what we thought the community wanted without actually taking the time to talk to the community to find out what it really wanted or what it really needed. So the in-reach that was taking place, the effort that the church put forth, or the special community day events, or all of these things, or even your special offerings at times, they may have been seen as a success to insiders of the church, but there was really no true social impact in the communities that surrounded the church or the communities that the church said it served. These experiences made me begin to have a strong desire to really interrogate how to do effective work outside of the context of, well, the walls of the church. The irony is not lost on me that I'm recording this inside of a church right now. But I began to draw and think of all of these ideas and interrogating, and what really began to crystallize for me what church outside of the walls looked like was found within the Gospels. And it began to help me to look at the Gospels through a new lens. Instead of purely looking at the gospel in the work and the call through this salvific lens of eternity, I began to ask myself, what is this salvific nature? What if this nature that we live into actually starts with simply tending to the human needs of our neighbors? I know a lot of times we concentrate on eternity, but what if the call is to first tend to the human needs of our neighbor? I mean, if we look at the Gospels from Mark to John, if we look at most of the work that Christ did, most of the work that he did took place outside of the temple walls. Christ was able to meet the human needs of those who he came into contact with. For those who were sick, he healed them. For those who were suffering from unjust oppression, he spoke out. He took on the oppressors. For those who needed compassion, he showed them compassion. For those who needed love, he showed them love. For those who were hungry, he fed them. See, the reality is this concept that we're even talking about on today, this concept of church outside of the walls, all can be rooted and grounded in the simple but profound examples that we find through the work that Christ showed us. The gospel, the work, however you want to frame it, actually has very little to do with the walls of a sanctuary. It has very little to do with the walls of a sanctuary. What I found in my context is that the examples of this work, this gospel, the reflection of the heart of Christ is found in the very unorthodox, hard, sloppy work of community. It is interwoven all throughout the tapestry of humanity. And here is where, for us as a church, and for me as a pastor, here is where New Communion comes into play. New Communion was founded right here at this church in 2016 by Reverend Monica Banks. And I came on board in 2017 as the co-director and then became the executive director in 2019. And since then, we've become New Communion of the Triad. So what is New Communion? New Communion is a faith-based organization with the goal of enhancing community relationships and diminishing the impacts of hunger and food insecurity. See, here in this city of Winston-Salem, we have consistently ranked in the top 10 for food insecurity within the entire nation. Right here in Winston-Salem, we have consistently ranked in the top 10 for food insecurity in the entire nation. As recently as last year, we know that 1 in 3 children and 1 in 5 adults in Winston-Salem currently live in poverty, and this figure has worsened since COVID has begun. Our approach to our pantry is very unique in the sense that we practice a model of shared abundance through the lens of the communion table. So what does this mean? What does shared abundance? Why do I say that? I'm speaking to a model that, once again, is found in the Gospels. It's modeling the feeding of the 5,000. It's modeling the feeding of the 5,000, which simply says this: when individuals and faith communities bring together and pool all of their resources together, there becomes a surplus of resources for all, or in other words, shared abundance. Our pantry reflects this model by our wide variety of partnerships that range from other local pantries and other local companies to faith communities and to individuals. It's through the lens of the communion table that all of this is made possible. The table is what I like to call the equalizer of all. Everyone has a seat at the Lord's table. No matter what your social status is, no matter where you come from, no matter your position in life, all are welcome to the Lord's table. So we take this posture of a new communion by taking our mobile van into each community, and by partnering with our neighbors, they in essence invite us to their table. So when we come into a community, there isn't a hierarchy. There isn't a hierarchy. We listen and we respond to the community. We don't go into any neighborhood without an invitation. We don't suffer from the superhero complex, which means that we don't swoop in and we're not coming in to save the community. We're not swooping in and knowing that we have all of the answers and we have all of the ideas and we're just going to come in and tell this community what it needs. That's not how communion works. Everybody has a voice at the table. Everybody has a seat at the table. This is how we run our pantry. Again, the belief is that each community that we go to knows what it needs. And here's the most important part. And each community currently has the assets that can address those needs far better than any knowledge that an outsider like myself or anybody else could bring into the community. A lot of the times, all of the assets, all of the giftings, all of the talents that a community needs lies within the community. If you want to get to know about the communities that you serve, go and talk to the people that live in those communities. Go and talk to the aunties and the grandmas and all the elders of the community. Go talk to those folks, because those people have the wisdom and the knowledge that you may need in order to serve those communities better, which is why most of our locations that we go to, we have a representative from the community that helps us, that helps to continue to strengthen those connections within the community so we can meet each and every unique need that each community has. You know, one mistake that's made a lot of times is folks think that if you have the answer for one community, that response applies to all. When that's not true at all. Each community is very unique in itself. In each community, you have to respond accordingly, which is why it's so important, if possible, whatever it is that you're aspiring to do in the community, have someone from the community either sit on your board or have somebody there that you know that you've come in partnership with to represent the neighborhoods that you're going to go serve. Those are the folks that the neighborhoods and that the neighbors trust in the community to lend their voice to whatever plan or project that you're trying to do. So for us, before we go to any community, we quickly begin to meet people within the community. And 9 times out of 10, the community will tell you who the neighborly liaison should be. The community will tell you who's the person that's the go-to person that knows everybody on the street or knows everybody in the apartment complex or knows everybody in the community. Every neighborhood has that person that is the organizer of the community. What you must do is get to know that person and allow them to lead the effort. Again, we are being invited as a pantry. When we drive our vans out to the community, we are being invited to their table. So we listen, we observe. If they tell us that, hey, this is the best place to park at, to serve food, this is the best time to come, this is the best day to do it, that's what we do. We listen and we respond accordingly. And that will garner 2 things. That will garner the trust of the community, which is number 1. And number 2, that will let that community know that you will be there for the long haul. Listen, every community that you may seek to go serve has experienced what I just talked about before, where whether it's a nonprofit or a church, they're used to people coming in and doing a one-day event and leaving. When you're seeking to become partners with neighborhoods, when you're seeking to become a partner in the community, That's what that truly means, that the community and the neighbors have just as much at stake as you do as a nonprofit going into these places. So again, it's through our lens of communion, a new communion, that we go into these communities knowing that it is a privilege and it is an honor for us to be invited to sit at their table, for us to be invited to run our pantry in these neighborhoods and communities. So now that we've covered New Communion, I want to talk about social impact and how it merges with our church here. So how did New Communion, what was the impact or has been the impact of New Communion on our church? Well, there's a couple of things, and one of the things is it's revived this work of outreach within our church. Our church has had a long-standing history of fighting food insecurity in our city. Our church has been here for 131 years, and as long as they've known, we have been fighting food insecurity when it became a big issue here in Winston-Salem. So we have a couple of programs that we assist, and I'll talk about that in a second. But on a personal level, the work of New Communion also brought me here to this church and ultimately led me to respond to the call to be the pastor of this church. So there are a couple things that New Communion has done. And one of them is a very tangible practice that we love here. One of the hallmarks of New Communion is every church that we partner with in the community, every church that we may go to that resides in one of the neighborhoods that we go serve, if we run our pantry van out of their parking lot, one of the things that those churches do in order to partner with New Communion is that they will sponsor a pantry item. So for instance, one church we have is the Tuna Church, where they give us canned tuna whenever we come out. Another church is the Ramen Church, and we have a pasta church, and so on and so forth. So one of the ways that New Communion has impacted our church is it has helped us as disciples in our heritage and the importance of communion. It was only natural for us to sponsor, well, you guessed it. Yep, PB&J. It is our play on communion. It is the way that both of these items, they represent the elements of communion for our church. But what this has done is for every time as a church, when we go out and we're buying these items for the pantry, it is a continual and constant reminder that the Lord's tables stretches far beyond the sanctuary, that communion is taking place everywhere we go, which is why we have this idea of a new communion. Like I said before, one of the things that we've done as a church is our passion has been food insecurity for a long time. New Communion, yes, it's a new nonprofit, relatively new nonprofit, but when it comes down to the passion that our church has and the heart behind it, it just connects with what our church has done for many, many years. We've been a partner with Crisis Control since it began here in Winston-Salem. We have continued to sponsor the food programs within our schools here. And during COVID last year, one of the things I'm very proud of is during COVID last year, we opened up a church pantry within one of our public schools that's right down the road from our church, where we know a lot of the students there suffer from food insecurity. So all New Communion did, it simply served as a catalyst to reignite the fires of social impact within our church that had long been within our congregation. All it did was reignite and give us a new way to approach fighting food insecurity as a church. So whatever social enterprise that you may be looking into or you may be aspiring to start within your church, 9 times out of 10, it's already there within your church. You just have to look for it. So 9 times out of 10, just like here, our church was already making a social impact through food insecurity. 9 times out of 10, whatever church you're a part of or whatever you're inspiring to do, you're already doing the work. You just have to put some arms around it and find out how can that work replicate itself and partner with the communities or the neighborhoods that you're striving to serve. 9 times out of 10, the gifts and the talents that you need are already currently in the pews. It's just mobilizing that to get people to go out to do the great work. So since 2016, there have been so many moments that have given us life, but none more than the times when we are able to respond to the community in meaningful ways that go beyond our what we are defined as. It goes far beyond us just being a pantry. Those times and those moments are some of the most meaningful moments. Like, for instance, one example of this that continues to stem on as a work now is the annual Easter event that our pantry does each and every year. This came from just doing this Easter egg hunt. This came from just listening to the community as we were getting closer to that holiday, and we were out just running the van, and some kids in the community had not experienced an Easter egg hunt before. We were talking with some of the youth there, asking them what they were up to, and some of them had never experienced an Easter egg hunt before. So we wanted to change that. So we reached out to different nonprofits and different folks within the community to see who we could partner with. But what we were shocked to find was that people didn't have an interest in trying to pull this event together. And one of the things that we constantly heard was, why are you trying to do this? Aren't you just a pantry? Aren't you just a pantry? Well, to that end, we ended up being able to organize and put on that event ourselves, and we've been doing it ever since then. And what I found was, we here as a pantry, we begin to gain the trust of the community even more, because we had become a piece of the community at that point. So each and every holiday now, we do these large scale events, these holiday events, simply because it is something that was needed within the community. That the issue was raised up to us. We didn't present the issue and just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We listened to the community and responded accordingly. What I found is that since we've been doing these type of things, like I said, we've become a piece of the community. They have let us have a seat at their table. So we're doing more than just food work. And this is where I said that work in community, sometimes you have to be very flexible. So even though you may go in with the idea, like for us, we were going in to say, we're a pantry and this is what we're doing. The longer you're within the community, the more that community trusts you, the more that you're able to hear story and share in story. In fact, at some point you become a part of story. The more that you do that, the more that you will have to expand your horizons in whatever capacity that you're serving in. So we realized quickly that yes, food insecurity is a window into a larger picture of what's going on. So when we went into these communities as a pantry, we had to understand that we were doing more than just being a pantry. We were doing more than just serving food. There were other needs that we needed to respond to within the community, which is why in 2017, we took the drastic step to even change our name. So we took off the pantry part and we just became New Communion, because everything that we did was in response to the community needs. So our primary goal is to fight food insecurity, but we're also responding to any of the urgent needs that may be taking place in the community, that if we are able to help, we certainly do try. So over the years, there have been plenty of challenges and opportunities for our pantry. And to be frankly honest with you, that's just the nature of work when you're doing work outside of the church walls. So by far, the greatest challenge as a pantry that we've had took place in this last year throughout this pandemic, throughout COVID. You're talking about having to be flexible. We've had to make a lot of changes, but one thing that we're proud of is that we never stopped running the pantry. All throughout COVID, we've never stopped running the pantry, but in fact, we've been able to serve and give out more food during this time period. But one of the things is that we had to adjust how we were able to go out and distribute the food to make sure that those who were helping us were safe, but also we never wanted to stop going to the community. We never wanted what we did to stop, because if anything, if the community needed food, it would be now. So our pantry, the mobile component, became so vital and so important during this time period for those who couldn't get to the grocery stores, due to the lack of transportation. For our elderly neighbors who were the most vulnerable when COVID first begun, our pantry being mobile was vital and critical to a lot of the neighborhoods that we served. One key component about food insecurity in our city is public transportation here is not good. So a lot of times, the communities that we serve, their scores to being able to walk to a store are very low. So most of the neighborhoods that we serve, when you look at their scores, and each place is ranked by scores of how close you are to a store. So the higher your score is, the closer you are, the easier it is for you to walk to a store. Out of 100%, most of the neighborhoods that we serve are in the low 10%, at the highest maybe 17%. So us being able to be mobile to get food to those folks were vital during this time period. Another thing that we were able to do throughout COVID as a mobile pantry, one of the things that came to light is we have a large community here of folks that live in tent communities. There are a large homeless population in this city that throughout this last year really came to bear and came to highlight even more that we have large tent communities within our city. So what we've been able to do is go to some of these tent communities, talk to the people that live there and find out what are the best pantry items that we can give. And more than that, what are the best things that we can do to help and connect them with other nonprofits that may help them as well. So it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of going to their table, even down to the normal bags of food that we would carry out. We changed those bags according to what they told us. So instead of having, cans that you would need a can opener, we have things now that everything is pop top, where they're able to open up the food pretty simple and easy, where you may or may not need any silverware or a fork or electricity or a can opener or anything like that. We also gave out can openers, we gave out silverware, we gave out all of these things. A lot of times when you live in a tent community, you're traveling by foot, which means you're carrying all of your belongings with you. We were able to condense our pantry items down to a smaller bag that they were able to carry. And we've been doing that ever since. So all of those things to say that with every challenge that COVID brought, it brought us more opportunities as a pantry to expand what we do and expand the amount of people that we serve. We also begun to, like I said, we dealt with housing. We dealt with helping people pay for their rent, helping to partner with nonprofits in the city that could help us be able to provide more means of support during these critical times. So one of the great opportunities that has come out of this pandemic is us being able to partner with our local hospital here. And through that, we've been able to partner with local farms and other local pantries. And we are able to provide meals for households now and fresh produce for households now. We provide these for our youth, we provide these for health compromised communities, and we provide these for our elderly community. And we've been doing that now since last spring. And every week we go out and we carry out enough food that they can eat, enough meals and enough produce that it carries them out throughout an entire week until we come out the next week. Once again, what this does is for everybody who, again, doesn't have transportation, or if you had compromised health and you didn't want to be outside of your house, if you weren't able to get your COVID shot yet, of all of these things, we've been able to address the food needs of these individuals. So challenges and opportunities, all of these things are the very rhythm, they are the heartbeat of what we do, and that continues to bring us back again and again and again to this concept. We come back again and again to the table. We come back to the table over and over again. And how many ways does this table show up in all the communities that we serve and all of the communities that we are invited to? So when we think of this idea of church and social impact, it really all boils down, when you think about it, that the church was always and has always been designed to be outside of the walls. The church has always been designed to be a community-facing institution and not an inward-facing institution. I'm reminded of the Great Commission as Jesus tells the disciples, therefore, go. Therefore, go. Effective work, this work that we do in the community, it's all about the people, not so much your programming. If we get caught up in the programming of things, it's going to be very hard. And to be a nonprofit and work in community, to do social impact, the name of the game is being flexible, which means you have to be flexible with your programming. 9 times out of 10, as I've said before, your church already has or is already involved in something that speaks to making a social impact. It can be hospitality, it can be childcare, it can even be maintenance or repairs or property work. For my church, it just so happens to be food insecurity. The assets that your church needs to make a social impact in the communities that you aspire to minister to are already within your congregation. The goal is simply to rethink, how do we do this great work? How do we turn what's inward facing to outward facing? For our church, New Communion has been a rethinking approach to fighting food. It's been a rethinking of our ideas of food insecurity. And it's something that our church had been involved with and had done years before the creation of the mobile market and pantry. So in the end, this concept of church and social impact and all the things that we're talking about, it's nothing new. It is nothing new. It's not a trending thing. It's not a fad. In fact, by doing this, we get back to the very roots of the gospel and the Great Commission. We get back to the very roots of why we do the work that we do. It's through this great work of turning what's thought of as inward facing to outward facing, to going outside of the church walls, that you're able to merge church and social impact. In fact, that's the way it's always been. When we look at the Gospels and we look at the way that Jesus lived, the way that he moved, the way that he worked, the way that he operated, most of the great work was done outside of the temple. Most of the great work was done outside of the temple. In fact, a lot of it was done around the table. So I thank you so much today for your time. I thank you so much for viewing this. And thank you so much to NBA for the opportunity to present. If you would like to learn more about New Communion, right now on your screen, you should see it pop up. Go to www.newcommunion.org. And as always, like us on Facebook. Blessings to you all, blessings in your journey, and continue to find your own unique way, whatever that is. Find your own unique way to have a social impact in this world. It's much simpler than what you may think. It's much simpler than what it may feel like. In fact, truth be told, it's really what we were created to do, to go do this great work. Thank you for your time today. I hope this has been a blessing to you.